Vipassana takes it a step further than anything else I've experienced, because we're really taught to tune into our internal bodily sensations. Hello, this is my Vipassana experience. After 10 days of silence, I'm out. I just got back. No phone, no writing. Okay, I did write a little bit. I wanted to take notes and have some better recollection of what actually was going on each day, how I was feeling, my experiences, all of that. They do recommend you not to do that, but I decided I wanted to. So I'm going to just open up again with why I went. And the main reason is right now on my journey of reconnecting to my authenticity, I feel like I just want to be with myself and like meet myself without distractions. And I think this 10 days offers a brilliant environment and framework for just being with yourself. And especially with the teachings from Goenka and Buddha, we're also learning about a whole lot of universal truths and how life works. Goenka in some of the discourses talks a lot about how this is the art of living. These are teachings that apply to life that allow you to go through it in a more, I guess, true way. And so, yeah, I kind of went into this without much expectation. I didn't know exactly what would happen or even all that was being taught. I didn't know that much about Vipassana. I knew some basics around the teachings of Buddha, but I kind of went in with an open mind and, yeah, got quite a lot out of the silence. And that's what I'm going to be going through today. So we'll start off with this first chapter. I've outlined the video today with a few different parts. One is the descent, kind of the first few days, facing all the noise. Next, I'll be going into the surrender, where I'm really like meeting myself, meeting the body, the sensations that come up. Third is the awakening, what I kind of discovered, how I found bits and pieces of peace when I discovered equanimity. Next, I'll kind of bridge and compare this practice to a few of the other things I've learned along my journey of coaching, self-development, spirituality, letting go, manifestation, energy work, all these different things. Then I'll go into kind of the return back to the real world, integration. I've been out for about 5 days now. Then I'll have a section on my 5 core takeaways. And then I'll kind of just close it up. So let's get into it. So the descent and facing all the noise. Yeah, the first few days were kind of a shock. I didn't really know what to expect, but there was actually a lot of pain, like physical pain. It wasn't that bad, but obviously my body was not used to sitting for 10 hours a day. And so the first few days, I just felt a lot of tension, a lot of knots coming up, which I later kind of learned about what might be going on there and what those might represent from a more like unconscious level of these parts of me, these, they call them sankharas, maybe coming up. All these things that I've stored and suppressed along the years coming up to the surface and being able to feel those. So yeah, I thought I would find a lot of peace, but in the first few days, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of storms. It's kind of like the body screaming for attention after years of neglect, which I actually now looking at it is very cool that the body is able to do this and that these things that we push down, once we give them space, once we're kind of decluttered from all of the outside world and chaos, it's beautiful how these things just kind of come up. I think the body and our, I guess, mind and the mixture of those two, the psychosomatics that kind of play themselves out, is just so incredible. Of how these things that we push down can just kind of come up like this. Yeah, so I guess I'll touch a little bit more on like why something like this, a 10-day silent meditation course, is so powerful, is because it essentially brings you away from all of this external noise in most of our lives and creates this very ripe environment for these things to come up, because when you're in there for the 10 days, you don't have to worry about much. Like, all the food is sorted out, the times, you have a timetable, you know what your day to day is going to be. So, you know you're going to be fed, you know you have a place to sleep, all these things, right? On top of that, it's noble silence, so you're not talking to people, um, which I'll explain later, or maybe I'll just do it now. But, like, yeah, I guess I'll cut a little bit into the ending. But it was cool to realize how much interactions with people really can affect the mind and cause like overthinking just in our daily interactions with life with other people. It's like, I don't know if you've noticed this for yourself, but a lot of my overthinking can come from how I've interacted with people, what I've said, what I didn't say. So when you take away speech, it's like things in a sense quiet down and you're able to focus on whatever might be deeper for it to come up. So that was really cool. Yeah, so I felt like the first few days were kind of like a detox in a way, allowing things to come up. And I thought it was really cool because the first 3 days were more focused on just a breathing type of meditation. And it really felt like mind training. I was kind of comparing it to like a Jedi mind training, really focusing on my breath. You're asked to kind of just focus on what that sensation feels like, the in and out of the breath, and eventually get to focusing on the sensations on a small area, right? Under your nose and above your upper lip. Just kind of training your mind to become more sensitive to sensations. And I could feel like there was so much progress each day, and my mind was getting way more sensitive to these things. And it was really cool. So now we'll move into the second part called the surrender and meeting the body. So on the fourth day, we're introduced to the real practice, Vipassana, which is kind of combining what we'd been training, this sense of like awareness and making our minds more sensitive to the sensations. And we start learning about this sense of an idea of equanimity. So on day 4, we begin kind of scanning through the body part by part to kind of just get used to what sensations feel like all over, and developing our understanding of this concept, the law of impermanence, or as said there, anicca, which essentially is noticing how every single thing is arising and falling. And this applies to everything: thoughts, our bodily sensations, our cravings, our aversions. Literally everything rises and falls. And that is such a big takeaway, which I'll get into later. But yeah, it was an interesting experience starting to scan the body. I felt like even after the first few days, all that like tension building up, I could feel so many knots in my body, like especially in my upper back, and they were kind of moving around day to day. Like sometimes I would be in my upper left back, sometimes they'd move around to the right side or down lower. And it was super interesting to start scanning and feel a lot of sensations. And day 4 was actually one of my most, I guess, sensational meditation days. And before I actually get into some of my experiences with the meditation itself, I do want to say that everyone is going to have their own experiences. And as I went into this, I was very careful not to talk to too many people or read too many things on what kind of experiences might happen, because I think that can bring a lot of expectation, a lot of craving and suffering, which the whole practice's point is to relieve ourselves of those. Because when we have cravings and aversions, things that we want, things that we're avoiding, that is where suffering comes from. And so, as I'm sharing my experiences now, and if you ever do go into something like this, do your best. Obviously, it's going to be not that easy for everyone, because when we have an idea of what could happen, especially if it's something cool, we might hold on to it and might want this thing to happen to us. But I guess it's part of the journey, learning what these cravings feel like, what expectations feel like, and learning to let go of those. So day 4 was powerful for me. After the 3 days of deep mind training and getting my mind used to feeling and sensing these sensations, the first time we actually do the body scan, it's guided by the audio of Goenka, from Goenka. And it was powerful. I was scanning through my body, and there's so much sensation, so much buzzing, as I was moving down from my head to my right arm and left arm, and then into my front, my chest area, and down, and then my back. As I was scanning through and getting from part to part and section to section, the section before were just kind of staying lit up and staying vibrating and sensitive. So it was so cool to kind of feel my whole body lit up and vibrating. It was quite a pleasant sensation, which I'll get into later, of how those can be dangerous. But yeah, it was cool to kind of scan through and start learning about the actual practice and how those things can actually be dangerous, of clinging to these sensations. Equanimity. I want to touch on this now, and that's kind of the next section. But when we have these awarenesses and we are not equanimous, that's when it leads to more craving, more aversion, more suffering. It's one thing to be aware of everything going on, but if we still have the desire for things, or want something to be a certain way, that's when suffering is caused. And that's why the second main part, the second wheel, I guess, if we want to use one of the analogies that were used in the discourses by Goenka, it's like a carriage with 2 wheels. One wheel is awareness, and the other is equanimity. If you just have awareness and you don't have this other thing, equanimity, it's not going to run very well. It won't run at all if one of the wheels isn't there, right? It'll be dragging along, it's going to be bumpy. And these 2 things need to be equal. So on one end, you need to be aware of the sensations that come up. And on the other, you need to be equanimous to them. You need to be non-reactive. You need to see them for what they are, impermanent. They're always rising and falling. So along the whole time, there was a lot of realizing where I am craving certain experiences and when I didn't want certain things too, and how that kind of caused little bumps in my practice, but also led to a lot of peace when I started tuning more into and developing my equanimity with these things. Yeah, on one of the later days, I had a dream about someone in my life and kind of felt this sense of craving for them to change. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, of wanting people in their life to change. And kind of the craving that comes along with that, and the suffering as well, when they continually aren't meeting the image that we have for what we want them to be. And it was really cool to kind of come to peace in a way with that old craving that I've had for certain people in my life to be a certain way. And when I kind of let go of it, when I see it with more equanimity, when I see that craving specifically, not even them, but that bodily sensation of craving, of wanting them to, or like when I think of them in a certain way, it feels good. It's like, oh, they're doing this thing that I want them to do. It feels good. But then when I learn to look at that with equanimity and be like, okay, this is going to pass anyways. Even if they meet my desire, it will pass. And on the flip side, seeing when they don't meet what I want, that is also going to pass. And that just really brought a lot of peace. One cool experience is, yeah, kind of seeing the servers there. So there's a few volunteers, um, and they're just kind of saintly people. Obviously, they're on their own journeys as well, but they're doing everything they can to make your stay as nice as possible. They're there to make sure everything runs smoothly. And one of the days, it was during tea time, I was just kind of sitting out, looking outside, and kind of sat next to one of the servers who was just eating. And I don't know, at one point, I was just filled with so much gratitude. So much just like, wow, this person is giving up so much of their time and energy to make sure that all of our experiences are as good as possible. And I was just flooded with a lot of like love and gratitude for this person specifically and all the servers, because it's such a beautiful thing that people are giving up their time to really help us learn these teachings and this way of life. And that's how much they also believe in it, because they want us to learn it well. Before I get into the integration and return and the core takeaways, I'm going to talk a bit about kind of bridging the wisdoms between everything that I've learned. So with my experiences growing up and being quite deeply into the personal development spaces, reading a lot of books, doing a lot of my own studies into like NLP, energy work, the practice of letting go, spirituality, coaching, different people along the way, Michael Singer, um, Tony Robbins, all these things. I really think this practice, Vipassana, and the teachings based in Buddhism really bring all these things together into something that touches on, I guess, kind of the two core aspects. One is the day-to-day aspect of life and being able to move through it with more peace, not allowing the external world to really dictate how we're feeling as much. So that's one core aspect, I'll say. And then the other is releasing and healing our traumas, especially the deep-rooted things. And this practice of Vipassana kind of touches on both. And I guess on the first bit, the not allowing the outside to really affect us, I think Vipassana takes it a step further than anything else I've experienced, because we're really taught to tune into our internal bodily sensations. And the meditation is essentially a body scan where we're tuned into every single sensation that comes up. The subtle ones, like the vibrations, the pulsing, as well, like heat, cold, as well as the more like gross sensations, like a knot in my back, or like a twitch, or just something that feels bigger, um, rather than, I guess, looking more outside or like at the emotions, which an emotion is just like a combination of sensations. Like anger could be heat somewhere, or a tightening in the chest, or like, yeah, heat in my head area or my ears is usually what I kind of feel or experience when I'm angry. So it takes it even deeper where we're not necessarily labeling these sensations as something like anger or sadness, but we're really just feeling what the sensations on our body are. So it takes it even closer to the most like raw data, which I think is pretty powerful. Um, and it's teaching equanimity on that. So it's allowing us to see it for what it really is, that it's rising and falling, rising and passing in every single moment. Everything is changing, and not really holding on to certain things happening. And then the other really deep and important part is in what I kind of mentioned before, this idea of a sankhara, which I think is quite connected to the idea of like stored trauma in the body, and how when we stop creating these sankharas, which are very much based on craving and aversion, when we begin to look at our sensations with equanimity, without craving, that is when we kind of allow the old things to come up, the deep rooted sankharas, the deep rooted blocks of energy and traumas to come up because we're no longer creating more. He kind of explains it as like we have these levels of these stored things, I'll just call them for now, and we have some really, really deep ones. And these kind of feed the ones above them, which are less deep and strong. But as we go through life, these stored sankharas are kind of our frame, our lens for how we see life. We're never actually experiencing the world as it really is, but we're experiencing them through these things that have happened to us in the past. An example of this, a trivial example, is like if we had a really bad relationship with someone named John and something was stored inside where there's a lot of like aversion now to this because John did something really bad to us, we felt hurt, um, and we kind of stored this inside. So there's some deep sankhara associated with these emotions to do with John, these feelings, etc. So the way this affects us in daily life is like maybe we're at a party and someone's like, "Oh, hey, John," this will trigger something in us to be like, "Oh my gosh, John's here." It could like spark some emotions. It could bring something up. So we're not actually seeing life truly as it is, but it's like life came in. Someone said John. We heard that, and then it hit something in us to cause more sensations and some reactions. Um, when in reality, a more clear way of living without these stored things could be like someone says John, we hear it, it doesn't hit anything, and then it might not mean anything, which is kind of more peaceful in a way that it doesn't hit these things. And so part of this practice is when we no longer develop these cravings and aversions to life, the old ones start to boil up and come up. And I think that is such an important part of the practice of life and moving through it because we all typically have these stored things, especially from childhood. Um, and those really affect how we live on a daily basis and they affect our experience. They're kind of our lens to life. And so as they begin to come up, we begin to heal more of them and are no longer, our life now is no longer dictated by our past, which is something that causes a lot of suffering, and kind of creates this like conditioned way of being. Whereas for me, the goal is liberation from all these past experiences and traumas, um, liberation from suffering, which is why I think this is such a beautiful approach because it has that aspect of gets into the depth of what's been stored already to bring it up, as well as allows us to see life more clearly in line with like the universal law of impermanence, and how we shouldn't really be holding on to things and shouldn't be allowing these things outside of us to affect how we're showing up. So I think a lot of these like different modalities of healing and moving through life kind of, they do converge here. I'm not saying this is the best thing out there right now. I'm still exploring it, but I think it's such a great and quite encompassing method, um, and teaching and way of living. Now I'm going to get into the return back to society, the last couple of days in there, and then kind of integration before I end with my top takeaway. So yeah, coming back was actually kind of hard for me. I felt like coming out of the silence for 10 days, being in this very peaceful environment, being so dedicated to this practice and learning so much and feeling a lot of peace. It was hard coming back into all the noise. And I know that just means personally that I still have a lot of work to do in bringing this practice into my daily life, of being able to see everything with equanimity, seeing everything with impermanence. But yeah, it was quite overwhelming coming back. Coming back to a lot of conversations, a lot of like messages waiting for me, a lot of thinking about, oh my gosh, what do I do now with all these teachings and learnings? But also a lot of beauty in coming back, a lot of realizing how all this noise, all these notifications, they do feel slightly different. I already did think I was a quite calm and non-reactive person in many aspects of life. Um, but it does feel a bit stronger now. I definitely did not come back enlightened, but in many ways, after the initial like period of overwhelm, I do feel this sense of lightness coming back. And yeah, this is the real test of the practice, is bringing it off the cushion, off the meditation cushion into the real world with all of with just way more like external things going on. And I think this is where the practice really gets real, is learning to apply equanimity to everything that is coming in through the senses, because there's obviously way more here now that I'm connected to my phone, talking to more people, um, having to think more about the future in a sense of making money, all these other things. So the work isn't necessarily to, I guess, stay calm anymore. I think my path moving forward still is this one of like diving into my authenticity, but it's also to remember impermanence. I think that's going to be one of my main things moving forward from this practice. So far, I've been continuing the meditation recommendations, which has been cool. But yeah, I'm excited to see how this affects things. I think it's too early to say, other than in many ways I do feel this lightness afterwards, which is really nice. But we'll see how it starts affecting everything else. Relationships, work, all these other things. So let's finish up with some core takeaways from my 10 days of silence. I've touched on a few of these already, just explaining the experience for me. But the first one is presence over progress, and how everything is impermanent. Wherever you are right now, in work, in any of your relationships, in your own meditation practice, it is completely secondary to how you are with it. The mind wants things to happen. You know, we have images of other people, how they should be. We have ideas of what experiences we want in meditation. We have ideas for how much money we want to make, all these things. But it doesn't actually matter. The real mastery comes in an equanimous way of being able to see whatever is actually going on, being able to notice it on a sensation level, and remain okay, remain neutral, and not let these things affect us. Because if you're being driven by your cravings or your aversions, that is taking you on a very different path than if you're kind of just allowing things to be as they are. And the craving and aversion path is such like a bumpy road, so many ups and downs, which is fine. But it doesn't have to be that way. There can be a lot more peace. And I would much rather go through life with this sense of peace where I'm showing up to each moment, each experience, not really letting it affect me as much. Yeah. The second one is on how pain is a teacher, not an enemy. There were lots of hours of my aching knees, knots in my back, my butt hurting. But the pain itself is not the suffering. It's the resistance to it. It's wanting it to go away, wanting it to stop. And when I stopped trying to get rid of these things and simply just observe it, it's just another sensation. And it moved, it changed, it shifted, it went away. And I think so often there's kind of, I guess I'll call them two levels of pain. One is the actual physical pain, say a knot in my back. Like on some level, yes, there's pain there. But on another level, there's the stories that I put around it of why it's there, how I don't want it to be there. I guess we'll call that the like resistance part. And often that adds even more pain to the experience is when we're not just being with the initial pain. And I'm being very like cautious in how I talk about that because every single sensation, even the ones we label as pain, are just sensations. And underneath every sensation, every thought, and this is kind of taught in the course, is like those are all just what does he use? Subatomic particles. And so every single thing, the pleasant sensations and the painful ones, on a deeper level, they're all the same thing, and they all have the same characteristics of rising and passing. Yeah, I think the body is always teaching us, and when we're really willing to be tuned in and aware and listen, there's a lot that we can take away. The third one kind of connects to the first two, but it's how equanimity is in itself a hidden bliss. It's a sense of peace. The deepest joys of my experience weren't the amazing sensations, but it was actually finding the neutrality underneath them. It was realizing that the ups and downs within the practice didn't actually matter, but that when I stayed equanimous and neutral, I felt so much peace, and that actually often led to better experiences, which we have to be careful there, of course, with wanting. And equanimity isn't an emotionless thing. We're not being taught to not feel, but we're being taught to not hold on to the things or push away the things, the emotions, the sensations. We're taught to just be there with them fully, to get angry if you need to feel those things. But then we learn that they eventually pass away. Yeah, it's like seeing all these things, the pain, pleasure, praise, the blame from outside, and seeing that they both will pass. And from that place, like life is still going to move, but you're no longer really tossed around by all the waves, all the highs and lows. It's just a lot more peace when you begin to develop this sense of equanimity. The fourth core takeaway is how you are 100% responsibility for your experience of life. In the silence, there is nowhere to project your discomfort. Of course, you may have stories that are coming up, ways that you're like, oh, this person did this to me. But underneath it all, as you're looking at your deep bodily sensations, there's no one to blame. And there's no one to fix it for you. You kind of realize that every single reaction, every emotion, every interpretation is yours. And that is not a burden, but it's power. It's being able to see that you hold your own keys to liberation. You're responsible for your inner world, and you can set yourself free from it all. There's a cool story that was shared where I think it was a story about the Buddha, and he was like teaching these courses, and for some reason someone wanted to kind of like defame him and like hurt him. And this guy like comes storming into one of his like meditation halls, I guess, where he was teaching, and had a lot of anger. And he was trying to like yell. He was trying to even get close to the Buddha and like do something to him. Um, and the Buddha kind of talks about how people are always coming into our world with these gifts. Sometimes they're pleasant or unpleasant things. Sometimes they're gifts of anger, gifts of joy. But it is up to us to accept these gifts. We don't have to. We have the responsibility to say no to things, to be like, yeah, I'm not going to take that on. Actually, that's not my energy to latch onto, to allow to affect me. And of course, some of these things are easier said than done, and practice is necessary to really integrate all of this. And so that's why it comes to my final takeaway is the practice never ends. The retreat, the 10 days will come to an end, but that is kind of where the work begins. That is just the initial planting of the seeds. And it's such a beautiful planting because you are able to dedicate 10 full days, kind of 9.5 actually, to deeply learning and making time and space for this practice. And now it's about bringing that into the real world. Every moment after, the emails that are coming in, the messages, sitting in traffic, conversations, etc. Those are where the real meditation begins and the real work begins, is learning to see those with equanimity. One of the things that I'm really also taking away is how it was said in there that the real yardstick for progress here in this practice is the amount of equanimity that we develop and are able to apply to life. It's not about these great experiences or sensations, but it's about the equanimity. That is the real thing to kind of measure how well we're doing in this practice. And that's not going to really get developed fully in 10 days. Just know that, because of course I wanted to get further along and like have this be deeper and more ingrained in me. But it's okay that it wasn't. Yeah, the point of all of this is really not to escape from the world, but it's to be able to move through it with more neutrality, more peace, more equanimity, and realize that that is how we're going to live the most beautiful life. So yes, in closing, the silence gave me a few answers, this experience, but most of all, it gave me more awareness and a practice and experience of these wisdoms and learnings. I feel like it's one thing to learn about them, but it's another to like practice it on a meditative level and really go deep with applying it to a very personal experience of my own bodily sensations. And I think that was extremely powerful. Yeah, let me know if you've ever done any of these. If you have any other questions about my experience, I didn't really go into detail about the 10 days or like what they actually look like. But I'd be happy to share about that some other time. But until then, good luck on your journey and a lot of loving kindness and compassion for you. Peace.